All right. Well, it's good evening to whoever is listening and watching this. My name is Carlos Aceves. I am a member of a community called Kalpulli Tlateka, People of the Earth Community, and our particular tradition is would be Nahuatlaca, which most people would associate with the Nahuatl language. We are also associated with people involved in Mexicayo, or those who identify themselves as Mexica. Let me begin by saying that the word Mexican and the word Mexico are not Spanish words. They are words of Nahuatl origin. Mexican, a Mexica, in Mexico City, Mexico. Those are words that hold a very deep meaning in the cosmogony of what people generally would call the Mexican people or the Mexican race. Basically, Mexico or Mexicayo, or being Mexican, is one of several traditions within the Nahuatl culture of how to relate to nature through an important aspect of nature. The word Mexican is derived from Mexico, which is me, which is the moon, she, which is the navel, and ko, which is a spiral that closes. And what that describes the power of the moon, how it's locked into the waters of the earth. And that locking of power between the moon and the earth through the water is one of the ways that allows the earth to create life, which includes ourselves. In historically, our origin, our tradition originates with the creation of corn. We considered a Nahuatl tradition, in Mexican tradition, that Mexicans and corn have a common origin, and that origin is what it would now be southern Mexico, Central America, that where we developed that special relationship with corn some 8,000 years ago. And then about 5,000 years ago, we decided to share it with the rest of the continent. And today, everybody associates corn with being Indian, but the fact is that corn's origin is Mexican. And we are the ones who gave it to all the Indians of North and South America. We shared with them the not only the seed, but the process to cultivate it, to harvest it. We give them the formula of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, as a system of planting. And so, our community is very aware of that spiritual tradition. One of the things that we do every year is we have a ceremonial planting of corn. That's to keep our relationship with Mother Corn going. My father used to say, when I said, why do you plant corn every year? And he said, well, that's what Mexicans do, is we plant corn. Corn used to be self-reproducing. And the stories say that corn gave up that self-reproduction ability in order to change and feed us by transforming into corn cobs. And we in turn said, okay, we'll we promise to forever, generation across generation, plant you, since you can no longer self-reproduce, we'll do the job for you, and we'll plant you in the ground, and that way we keep both our species alive. There's in Mexican cultures, there's some very significant icons of our culture. For example, if you show any Mexican a photograph or an image of the Aztec calendar, they immediately identify. And if you say, "Is this who you are? Is this part of your culture?" Mexicans will say, "Yes, of course." If you show them a picture of a pyramid and say, "Is this who you are? Is this part of your culture?" They say, "Yes, of course." If you take them to a danza, Indian dances, whether it be the matachines or whether it be danza azteca, but wherever a drum and some gourd rattles are involved, and you hear that, and you ask a Mexican, "Is this part of your culture? Is this who you are?" They'll say, "Yes." And what we're saying there, or I just give the example of the word Mexican, which is of Nahuatl origin. We still call ourselves by our Nahuatl name, Mexicano, Mexica, and so we either consciously or unconsciously know that we are a native. We come from a native heritage. Those of us who are more conscious about it have formed communities like the one we have in El Paso, Kalpulli Tlateka, People of the Earth Community. Kalpulli is a Nahuatl word that means community. Kal is house, and pul means extended. Li is you're saying like a vibration. So a Kalpulli is where it's a extended house where it's like a gathering place for many people, because it's not just like a single home. And Tlateca means people of the earth. Among what is called a Hispanic population, over the past 30 years, there has been a significant interest in Native tradition and identifying as Native. Two cycles of the U.S. Census, 2 cycles ago in the U.S. Census, the federal government decided to allow Hispanic, those who identify themselves as Hispanic in the form, to also identify themselves as Native, as a Native American. So in the census, if you identify as Hispanic, you can identify as a white Hispanic, but you can also identify as an indigenous Hispanic or as a Native American Hispanic. And that was because there's a large interest among populations from Mexico and Latin America, to say, "Hey, wait a minute, look at my skin, look at my skin, look at your skin. We're certainly not white. And so, but we're not African American. So is there a deeper identity there that we're not aware of or we're not acknowledging?" And so the census makes that accommodation. The other thing that the federal government has done is that in 1979, it passed a law that was amended again in 1990, first under Jimmy Carter and then under Bill Clinton, the 2 presidents, called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And the American Indian Religious Freedom Act recognizes that Native people have a right to our religious practices. But the Bureau of Indian Affairs was not equipped to fully defend or accommodate that practice. And so, because the Bureau of Indian Affairs is under the Department of the Interior, so they passed a law that would be under the executive department, under the Department of the presidency, called ARFA. And so today there are many indigenous groups that don't have a BIA status, Bureau of Indian Affairs status, but nevertheless are permitted and have the right to practice religious indigenous tradition. And this is important because there's aspects to indigenous practice of our spirituality that don't always coincide with the legal system in the United States. For example, the possession of eagle feathers. Possession of eagle feathers are a federal crime, unless you belong to an indigenous community and are using them for religious practice. The other ceremony is the peyote ceremony that's largely practiced by the Native American Church. Peyote is a federally classified substance as a drug, but can be used when it is used by an indigenous community for religious practices. And so it's important in claiming indigeneity, to claim it as part of a community. It isn't individual religious freedom. Like all Native Americans, we use particular instruments. The drum is very important, very central to any ceremony. In our communities, we have practices of the danza Azteca and the danza matachin, the matachines, and the drum is very important. The wearing of feathers, representing our spiritual nature, which the birds represent, because the birds are able to elevate themselves from the ground. That's a way we represent the raising of spirit. Is anything that can fly, anything that can lifts itself off the earth, is a spiritual act. And so the wearing of feathers is weird. We too are, potential birds. We too are potential spirits. And with that come the gourd rattles, the staffs, which signify a responsibility over certain ceremonies. And of course, there's specific ceremonies. Ours, the Temazcal, which in the north is called the Sweat Lodge. And there's many forms of sweat lodges, both in the north and in Mexico. In Mexico, there's sweat lodges made of adobe, but there's also sweat lodges made of blankets and willows, just like there is here. But it's all Temazcal. Temazcal means house of cleansing. It isn't a bathhouse; it's a house of cleansing. There's different kind of danzas or dances that are offered. One particular and increasingly popular practice of our community, not just Kalpulli Tlateka, but all Mexicans who practice Nahuatl tradition, is the use of the Aztec calendar. When children are born, they ask somebody, Tonalpowaki, a keeper of the calendar, to find their child's name within the calendar. And so they receive all the symbols and all the meaning that's stored in the Aztec calendar based on the birthday of that child. That's increasingly popular. There's people who practice seriously as a spiritual tradition, and there's even places online that you can go and get your Mayan or your Aztec name on a T-shirt based on the specific information that the Aztec calendar has. And again, 20, 30 years ago, much of this practice was very dormant or used only very, very, very small practice of it. Now we have serious people who know how to read the calendar, and depending on your day and time of birth, they can tell you these are the symbols that are associated with your birth. And from there, people pick a name. So that's an important aspect of our tradition. And specifically Mexico, or the Mexicans, Mexico City was constructed. The construction began in 1325, after the last of the 7 Nahuatlaca nations completed their migration from the north of Mexico. How far north, it's unclear, but there's evidence that our places of origin were in Utah, in California, places in Texas, even places as far as the Great Lakes. There's evidence of our culture and so 7 nations were spread across, and it stands to reason because we began spreading north and south 5,000 years ago, when we began sharing corn with the rest of our brothers and sisters. So there was migration that began, that culminated in 1325. All the 7 groups were there in central Mexico, and they had enough knowledge to build the new capital of Nahuatlaca culture in the middle of an inland ocean called Texcoco. The capital, the Nahuatlaca Center, cultural, spiritual, political, economic center, before that was in Tula with the Toltecs. Before that, it had been at Teotihuacan. Before that, it had been with the Totonacas, those people that fly around and that are popular. Before that, it was with the Mixtecos, and before that, it was with the Olmecas. So the center of Nahuatlaca culture has changed from time to time. The last change was when it went in the 1300s from Tula to that inland ocean called Texcoco, and we built the city literally in the middle of water. So when the Spaniards took over Mexico, took over the territory, they started calling everybody, not just the people in central, or those who lived in the city in the middle of water, but they started calling everybody Mexican. And they would call us Mexicans. They would call us naturales. They would call us nativos. They would even call us salvajes. But the word Mexican kind of stuck around. In the 1700s, the first major dictionary of our Nahuatl language was written in France, published in France, and it was called Diccionario de la Lengua Mexicana, or Nahuatl. Nahuatl is the other word that stuck around for who we were. And Nahuatl, again, has a deep meaning. Nahuatl simply means harmonious. So when the Spaniards would say, "Who are you?" we would say, "We are harmony." In other words, we don't mean you any harm. And what language do we speak? Well, we speak the language of harmony, Nahuatl. But the language was not Nahuatl, and all of the people of what is now the territory of Mexico were not Mexicans. Mexicans were just those in the center. But because of the colonization, those two words stayed around to basically identify or form the basis upon which we gather our identity. That's why they say, "Well, what tribe are you from?" We're Mexicas. And what's your language? Well, language is Nahuatl. Again, the more and more people all over the United States are very interested in what their indigeneity might be and how they can go about. For Mexicans, for people who are Mexican origin, every city now, every major city now has several groups of danza Azteca. That's a good way of connecting with our native culture. Every city has a form of Kalpulli. There's Kalpullis all over Mexico, but there's Kalpullis all over the United States as well. And of course, any embassy or office of the Mexican government is now very enthused about connecting people to their indigeneity, so that there's many ways of reconnecting to being Indian. Questions?
Yes, Carlos, I have a couple of questions. You gave me a good explanation, talked very good about the history, very detailed on some of the ceremonies associated with the Mexica, and very interesting to hear the danzas as the danzas aztecas, the danzas matachines. I'd like to ask, how long have you been in community, and what made you interested in being in this community?
Well, when I became a parent, I decided to name my children, give my children Nahuatl names. And then I realized, although I thought I knew what being a Mexican was, I hadn't realized how much I still needed to learn. And as if by act of magic, I found people here in El Paso who are connected to tradition by lineage. In indigenous tradition, this is all over. I met people from all kinds of Indian groups. There were people who, across generations, took it upon themselves to teach their young since they were children, with the expressed purpose of passing on the tradition, because they thought that they call it la tradición, was so important that it couldn't be lost. And I asked one of my maestros, Francisco Jimenez Tlacael, one time, that if they had done this so that we could feel proud of being Mexicans. And he said, no, that's not the main reason why they kept la tradición. I said, well, why? He says, because la tradición is a body of knowledge that is going to be key in the survival of the human species. And I said, well, how's that? He said, Western civilization is not a sustainable society. It's self-destructive, and it's going to collapse. And people are going to need alternatives. And this is what la tradición has. And since then, I found that to be true. That it isn't just wearing feathers or shaking a rattle or hitting a drum. There are, like the Aztec calendar. The Aztec calendar is analog astronomical clock. Very detailed, very precise. And so that information that we get for our children is more than just astrology. It's also astronomy. So since I could say since 78, I became serious about understanding my indigeneity. I already identified as indigenous, but I really didn't see the need to really explore and investigate. And that, yes, there was a need.
Mm. Also, if I could ask Carlos, songs, I'm thinking of songs. What do songs mean to community? I feel that songs is not just song like the typical song that you hear on the radio. What does a song mean to you, or what does a song mean to a community?
Well, indigeneity or indigenous is about being natural. It's about following the patterns of nature. Western culture is very individualistic. Music is an individual endeavor, and you get a hit, you become popular, and so on and so forth. But in indigenous culture, songs are for gathering community, are for uniting community, are for sustaining families emotionally. They're for understanding, you know, how we're related to nature. And so they're not they're not so much about being a songwriter or being a popular singer, but they're about, it's a communal endeavor. That's hard for Western thinking to understand. It's kind of like, uh, what makes the armed forces powerful. It's not the weapons, you know, it's the fact that they're able to function as a community, as a group. That grouping, they're coming together as a group is the strength of people. It's also the strength of nature. It's all the strength of everything in the universe. I mean, the solar system, there's a power to the solar system. Why? Because it functions as a group. It isn't just a bunch of planets out there flapping in outer space. They're dancing to the rhythm of the sun. And that's the way we kind of see humanity, or all aspects of nature, as community. So song is a vibration that comes from the heart, and so that's how we use song.
Lastly, Carlos, we talked about traditions. On a personal note, I'd like to ask you, what's one tradition out of many that you find deep in your heart, and why, if I could ask?
It's a very simple one, and it's something that's actually very common, but we don't think about it too much. Okay, and that's a tradition of this. Whenever I see a boy or a girl out in school or on the street or in the community, I acknowledge them as mijo or mija. In other words, my child, my child. And I never realized that that's particular to indigenous culture, to regard every child as my child and my responsibility. And so, so now when I say that, mija, it's a tradition that I is no longer unconscious, but it's very conscious. And I make it a point to say, I'm making myself responsible for that child.
That's beautiful. Beautiful to hear. Beautiful to see it that way, because it is important to understand and recognize the role and what you mean to them and what they mean to you as well. We are all connected, like you said. So it's understanding, and it's beautiful to understand that. I thank you for your time, Mr. Aceves, and for the explanation and explaining and talking about the history of this community. And I hope those who watch it will help them not only understand, but also to reconnect with their roots.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.